whether it's intentional or unintentional, there seems to be a double standard in the way the press covers stories about shootings. Now, if you notice headlines, it always seems like the press is a lot nicer or kinder to white shooters versus black victims of shootings. And there is a compilation of certain headlines that kind of make that point. Now, before I read you these headlines and give you the explanations of the stories behind them, I do want to note that when you compare and contrast them, they don't come from the exact same publication. So it could be true that while one publication seems to be very nice to white shooters, they could probably also be very nice to black victims, right?
Very likely. Very likely.
No, I know, but
No.
but look, the reason why I say that is because I don't want to be misleading, right? So if we had, let's say, the Huffington Post or the Washington Post, just some random publication, and we gave you a list of all the different headlines they had and you compared those, then it's indisputable, right? But in this case, you have a number of different publications.
And of course, and there's a random, it's not random, they selected it for a reason, but it's a collection of things that don't necessarily represent the entirety of those newspapers and the media overall. Now, having said that, when you read them all, as Anna will in a second, you begin to get a sense of a pattern, and it's a pattern I've seen my whole life covering the news. So it was an interesting compilation that they put together. All
right, so let's go to the first headline, and it's regarding a white suspect from Alabama. The headline says, "Alabama suspect brilliant but social misfit." And that was the Lubbock Avalanche Journal, and they chose to represent Amy Bishop in that way. Amy Bishop was a former college professor who eventually pleaded guilty to killing 3 colleagues and wounding 3 others at a faculty meeting in 2010. Okay, so brilliant, misfit, interesting way of putting things, right? Now let's look at a black victim. Montgomery's largest homicide victim had history of narcotics abuse, tangles with the law.
Latest homicide victim, and this is something that I've pointed out on many instances here without this. Like just in the LA shooting that happened a couple of days ago, they said the victim was not, it's not known whether he had gang affiliations. Then why did you write that?
Yeah.
Okay, so even though they're victims, they're the ones who got killed, a history of narcotics abuse, tangles with the law, the headline screams he had it coming, right? The shooters, well, they were just misfits. But look, tip of the iceberg, we got a lot more.
Yeah, and by the way, that was from AL.com. They're the ones who ran that headline. I want to give you the sources. All right, so let's go to a white suspect. Son in Staten Island murders was brilliant, athletic, but his demons were the death of parents. And that was regarding a story that the Staten Island Advance wrote about Eric Bellucci. He was a mentally ill New York man who allegedly killed his parents.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of course, hey, when somebody does a terrible shooting, like what went wrong? Oh, we don't understand. He was a good guy before, and all of a sudden he did the shooting. Now, look, they don't cover it in this article, but you could also do headlines regarding white shooters versus Muslim shooters. I don't believe I've ever seen a Muslim shooter be called brilliant. Not like, oh, eccentric Muslim was brilliant and wonderful, but was a misfit.
Yeah.
No, it's a dangerous Muslim, does terrorist operation inside the United States.
Yes.
So somehow the white shooters seem to be misfits a lot, even though they were otherwise brilliant.
It's just that double standard definitely exists. And I think a perfect example of that would be how the press covered Trayvon Martin, right? So look at this headline from NBC News. They said, Trayvon Martin was suspended 3 times from school. Remember, Trayvon Martin was the victim of a shooting. He died. This is a headline that they published about him after he died. Compare that to a Fox News headline about Jared Michael Padgett, Oregon school shooting suspect fascinated with guns, but was a devoted Mormon, his friends say.
Okay, now, again, I'm going to go back to the Muslim point for a second. Let me just switch it up on you. Oregon school shooting suspect, fascinated with guns, but was a devoted Muslim, his friends say.
I just can't.
I don't think that there would be a but in that sentence. Okay? You just see the framing. It's fascinating, that's all.
It is incredible. So let's go to another black victim. Police, slain Lakeland teen had been shot before. Death possibly drug-related. And that was a headline in the Ledger in Florida.
Well, almost all those victim ones seem to say, well, they had it coming. I mean, look, he was a bad guy anyway. Don't sweat it.
And finally, there was a headline about the Santa Barbara shooter. This is in the Whittier Daily News. Santa Barbara shooting, suspect was soft-spoken, polite, a gentleman, ex-principal says.
Okay, I mean, how much more can they go out of their way to say what a lovely this guy who killed all those folks was? And again, they're trying to make sense of it. I understand why they frame it that way. But why don't you give the same benefit of the doubt to black victims?
Right.
You know, how often, look, sometimes I'm sure that they have nice things written about victims at different times. But far too often, you're getting these things like they were somehow related to drugs or not related to drugs, related to gangs or not related to gangs. But it's in the title, right?
I think what was telling about the Trayvon Martin case was how they immediately performed a toxicology exam on him, but not on Zimmerman, right?
Yeah.
And it was because there's this immediate assumption that the person of color or the minority in the story or in the case is the person who was under the influence of drugs or had some sort of gang affiliation. And it's a certain bias and a certain prejudice that some people have in their subconscious. I don't think that there are people who are overtly racist or overtly discriminating against other people. I think it's the certain stereotypes that we've all bought into because of the mass media, because of maybe some personal experiences. Who knows what it is, right? And we have to have an open dialogue about it so we can combat it. We can't pretend like it doesn't exist. It's obviously clear in the way the media covers it. It's clear in the way that we react to these types of stories. And it's clear in the way law enforcement reacts to these types of stories.
So in Trayvon Martin case, not only did they do a toxicology on the victim, Trayvon Martin, they did a background check on the victim. And look, that's perfectly fine. There was a scuffle, etc. But they didn't do one on the shooter. That's crazy. Why wouldn't you do toxicology and a background check immediately on the guy who shot the other guy in the chest and killed him? And in the case of Michael Brown, the kid who was just killed in Missouri, they are doing a toxicology report on him. Okay, they say that's standard practice in Missouri, no problem. Did they do one on the cop?
We don't know because they won't release any information. They won't even let us know how many times he's been shot. You know,
it's crazy.
There's a lot of information that we do not know about the Michael Brown story because there's a lack of transparency from the police department. And I do want to say I can understand why at this moment they don't want to release the identity of the police officer because they're worried about death threats and all of that. But at the same time, there are certain elements of the story that I think the public has a right to know about. The ACLU is asking for the information. They refuse to give the information.
And let me just double down on what Anna said. Look, I don't think that the writers of these titles in majority are overt racists that go around using the N-word, saying, you know how they are, whatever. No, they don't quite realize how they're framing things. And part of the reason to do this story, and Huffington Post did a great job with this, is to show it to you so you go, oh, wait, maybe we are subconsciously thinking things that's not quite fair.
Right.
And then when you put it down in the media and that's your screaming title, well, that's how it goes into everybody else's head. Nick Wing did a great job with that on Huffington Post.